Welcome everybody to the regular Thursday, June 10th, 2021 meeting of the Walnut Creek Planning Commission. Will the secretary call the roll, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Lezak,
Here.
Commissioner Pickett,
Here.
Commissioner Strongman,
Here.
Commissioner Anderson,
Here.
Commissioner Ward,
Here.
Vice Chair Reiser,
Here.
and Chair Krasalik.
Here.
You're all here.
Thank you. This is a meeting by teleconference only. The meeting is being held in accordance with the Brown Act as currently in effect under the State Emergency Services Act, the Governor's Emergency Declaration related to COVID-19, and the Governor's Executive Order N-2920 issued on March 17th, 2020, that allows attendance by members of the Commission, city staff, and the public to participate and conduct the meeting by teleconference. Teleconference locations are not open to the public. To provide a live remote public comment, please join the Zoom teleconference meeting. The meeting ID this evening is 913-6211-3624, and the passcode is 777001. When the chair opens the public comment period, use the raised hand feature or press *9, which will alert staff and commissioners that you have a public comment you would like to provide. Please state your name and residence and city of residence for the record. You will have 3 minutes to make your comments. With that, we will go on to the first item of business tonight, which is our consent calendar. Mr. Secretary, is there anything on the consent calendar?
No, there's not, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We'll move on to item number 3, which is public communication. This portion of the meeting is reserved for comments on items that are not on the agenda. Under the Brown Act, the Commission cannot act on items raised during the public communications, but may respond briefly to statements made or questions posed and request clarification or refer the item to staff. Does any member of the public wish to provide public comments at this time? If so, please use the raised hand feature or press *9 if you would like to provide a public comment. At this time, I will ask the Commission Secretary, are there any members of the public who would like to provide a comment to us this evening?
No, there are nobody raising their hand, and we have no emails that have been submitted.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Move on to item number 4 then, public hearings. We have one public hearing this evening, I believe. The public hearing is for amendments to the accessory dwelling unit, the ADU regulations, and zoning ordinance amendment. We will start off with a presentation by staff. Mr. Smith, I believe you or one of your members has a nice presentation for us this evening.
Well, I don't want to presume that it's nice, but I do have a presentation. I'll take my secretary hat off and put on my staff hat for a moment, and let me go ahead and share the screen. Get this going, put it in slideshow. Come on. Okay, can you everybody see my slide here? Great. So, good evening, Commissioners. I'm Andrew Smith, Senior Planner and Head of Long Range and Transportation Planning for the City of Walnut Creek. What we are here with tonight is a recommendation to the City Council for a zoning ordinance amendment for regulations pertaining to accessory dwelling units. And of course, this is in response to recent changes in state law. Before I actually go into the various, the actual proposed amendments, I want to first just address the elephant in the room, and that is that, as I'm sure you all know from reading the staff report, the state has essentially taken away a fair bit of local control as it applies to accessory dwelling units. And that can sometimes, of course, be a bitter pill to swallow, but I'd like to kind of speak for a few minutes about the reason why, why the state's doing this, and it provides a little bit of a counterbalance, if you will, to the issues we'll be discussing tonight. As I'm sure you know, we, the City of Walnut Creek, the Bay Area, the state, are in a housing crisis. There is simply more, frankly, just more people than homes, if you will. Here in Walnut Creek, our most recent count of unhoused individuals, unhoused citizens, and this was actually pre-COVID. We had 80 Walnut Creek residents that were unsheltered. And I'm sure that number's actually gone up since COVID, and usually that number is an undercount. In addition, and this is really a larger number, 17% of all Walnut Creek households spend more than half of their income on housing. And that basically puts them in the category of being what's called severely burdened or cost overburdened in terms of what they have to pay for housing as a percentage of their income. And with regard to the production of housing in Walnut Creek, we are expecting to meet only 18% of the demand for affordable housing for the current housing element cycle, which runs from 2015 to 2023. We don't seem to have too much trouble being able to produce market rate, or dare I say above market rate housing, but the more affordable housing, like most jurisdictions, honestly, we're significantly behind the ball there. With that as prelude, I want to say that really ADUs can be part of the solution. They're really particularly well suited, not just to providing more housing, but providing housing that can be affordable. Reasons for that is, for one, they cost less to build. Now, the land costs usually aren't so much of an issue, if an issue at all, because that's a sunk cost. The homeowner already owns the land, and they're just adding more housing to it. There's generally less infrastructure required for ADUs. They can usually tie into existing water and sewer. They don't have to build roads, things of that nature. And then the actual construction of the ADUs tends to be less expensive than, for example, multifamily housing. It's usually basic, simple wood frame construction or even modular construction, as opposed to, multi-story buildings or things that require concrete and steel. ADUs can also be a source of income for the homeowners. If they rent them out, that can help offset mortgage expenses, and it can help people to really actually enter into home ownership by being able to offset some of the high costs of getting into home ownership. And it provides flexibility for families. The ADUs, when I'm talking to just the general, non-planners about ADUs, and they go, "What's an ADU?" And I say, "A granny flat." "Oh yeah, granny flat." Well, the reason why they're called a granny flat is because extended family. You could have grandma, as an example, living in the ADU. It also offers opportunities for aging in place, whether it be that perhaps younger members of the family just out of school live in the ADU while the parents or grandparents are in the house, or maybe vice versa, as parents or grandparents are downsizing. Or maybe offering housing opportunity for caretakers. It gives additional opportunities for people to age in place, and does this within our existing neighborhoods, and generally in a manner that is really consistent with our neighborhoods. That's well integrated into our neighborhoods. So what exactly has the state done? Kind of big picture, the high level stuff, they've superseded most local zoning regulations. That's that bitter pill that I mentioned. Not all zoning regulations, but a good amount of that. And we'll discuss that and discuss, what we can still regulate and what we're recommending to do in a moment here. It's also, the state law has been changed so that now cities have to allow JADUs. That's a junior accessory dwelling unit. This is something that used to be an option for cities. Walnut Creek hadn't done it prior, but with the new regulations, like all cities and counties in the state, were required to allow junior accessory dwelling units in all single-family zones. And what a junior accessory dwelling unit is, and I'll get more into the details on this, but it's basically, it's what it sounds like. It's a small ADU, no more than 500 square feet. It actually has to be part of the main house, and there's some other restrictions that go with that. Some new here, so this is, I think, a significant door opening, if you will. ADUs are now allowed with multifamily and mixed-use development. It used to be that it was just with single family, and now they are allowed by right with multifamily and mixed use. The parking requirements for ADUs have been largely, if not entirely, removed by state law. And also short-term rentals are prohibited in ADUs under the new state laws. So, your Airbnbs and your Verbos, those are generally they are not allowed in ADUs that were built after, I think it was January of 2020 when the current rules went into effect, the current state law. ADUs built prior to that time, they're grandfathered in, so they're not subject to that limitation. And then state law has further reduced utility connection fees. So this is not an issue at the city, but things like for East Bay Mud, Contra Costa Water, Central Sand, when you're building housing and you're adding new connections to the water or sewer, there's usually very significant connection fees, and those have been reduced and in some cases waived under state law, and that actually brings down a major hurdle towards people building ADUs. Before this, you could sometimes expect to see utility connection fees of upwards of about $50,000 for an ADU, and that usually, I would say usually was cost prohibitive for at least most people that came in and spoke with us at the planning counter with an interest in doing an ADU. So when, I mentioned, hey, a lot of the local zoning regulations have been superseded. Well, when do the zoning regulations apply? When do our local regulations apply? And for that, I want to talk about, where we can't have zoning regulations, and it's what we planners kind of informally refer to as state exempt ADUs. That's not a term you're going to see in the state law itself, but buried away in the government code, there's a category of ADUs where they are exempt from all city and all local and state regulations other than the building code and the California Coastal Act. Beyond that, it's just get a building permit and you're not subject to anything. Anything that does not fall under state exempt, then we can regulate as allowed under state law. So let's just go through this really quickly. What's state exempt and what's not? First, looking at newly constructed detached ADUs, so a new standalone building. For single family, if it's up to 800 square feet in floor area and no more than 16 feet in height, it's state exempt. If it's larger or taller, then our rules apply, our local rules apply. In the case of multifamily, all new detached ADUs for multifamily development are state exempt. Now let's look at converting an existing detached building. So the first chunk was if you're building something new from scratch. This is you're converting a building, maybe a detached garage or an accessory building or something along those lines. State exempt is if you're not adding more than 150 square feet of additional floor area to that building. So, you could actually have, say, a 3,000 square foot shop building. And under state law, you could convert it into a 3,000 square foot ADU. Of course, that's not something we expect to see very much because there's not very many 3,000 square foot shop buildings in single family neighborhoods in Walnut Creek. Anything more than adding 150 square feet of additional floor area, that then triggers, you're no longer state exempt and subject to local regulations. In the case of multifamily, any conversion of an accessory building into an ADU, it's state exempt. And then lastly, attached ADUs, if you're just converting existing floor area within the house, that's state exempt. If you add any additional floor area, that's not state exempt. That then is local to our subject to our local regulations. And the reason why I had that little flashing orange arrow there is a reminder for me to point out to you that this is something where my staff report is actually, there's a mistake in the staff report. The ordinance is correct, does reflect this, but the staff report says that you can have up to 150 additional square feet of floor area and still be state exempt. That is not the case for these attached ADUs. So I do apologize for that. And then for, again, multifamily development, as long as you're not adding any new floor area, you're state exempt. So that kind of breaks down what's state exempt. In other words, what ADUs are you subject to building code and California Coastal Act, which doesn't apply in Walnut Creek, and nothing else, versus the everything else where, okay, yes, we do have some local control. And so let's go into, well, what is that local control? So our proposed regulations, just right off the bat, number of ADUs. Single family, saying the proposed ordinance says you can have one ADU per lot. And multifamily, you can have 2 detached ADUs, or if you're doing an internal conversion with, if you have an apartment building and you're converting the garage or whatever existing space inside that building to attached ADUs, you can have as many the number of ADUs that you're allowed can be up to 25% of the number of regular dwelling units in that buildings. So if you have a 20-unit apartment building, if you've got space to do it, you can add 5 attached ADUs within that existing building. You can't add to the building. There's no additional floor area. So it's either 2 detached ADUs or up to 25% of attached. I do want to mention really quickly here that the current interim urgency ordinance that we've been operating under for about a year and a half, the state law has been amended twice, by the way, so the rules were changed significantly. That went into effect at the beginning of 2020, and then they were further amended with effect at the beginning of this year. And based on our reading, and it wasn't just Walnut Creek, it was actually most cities, based on our reading of state law, the state law seemed to say pretty clearly that for single family, cities had to allow both an attached and a detached ADU. The California Department of Housing and Community Development, who is authorized to interpret and issue direction on these laws, in last December, they came out and said, no, it's either or. It's one ADU, either attached or detached. So I just want to call that out, as opposed to the current interim regulations that we're operating under right now. Okay, so moving on, speed things up here. Setbacks, those state exempt ADUs, they're required to be at least 4 feet from side and rear property lines, but otherwise they're not subject to any setbacks at all. They could be, in theory, located in the front yard. Again, not saying to expect that to necessarily happen, but it is a possibility. All other ADUs that are not state exempt, they are still allowed a 4-foot side and rear setback as per state law, but elsewhere we get to keep our existing setbacks. So for example, most front setbacks are in the 15 to 20 foot range. Lot coverage in FAR, state exempt units, they're completely, the lot coverage and FAR requirements are completely waived. For all other ADUs, they're waived, lot coverage and FAR rules are waived for any ADU that is up to 800 square feet. But if it's more than 800 square feet, then our local lot coverage and FAR regulations, floor area ratio regulations continue to apply. Height, state exempt ADUs, they're limited to a height of 16 feet, or if they're converting an existing building, they just have to stay within the existing outer dimensions of that building, the footprint and the height of the building, basically. All other non-exempt ADUs, if they're building within the normal setbacks, so for example, they're taking advantage of that 4-foot rear setback where normally 15 feet would be required, that portion in that rear setback area cannot exceed 16 feet in height. Elsewhere on the property, it's just the standard height limit that applies to the house, which is, or apartment. It's usually in the 25 to 30 foot range, 2 stories. Maximum floor area. State exempt ADUs, as I mentioned, they cap out at 800 square feet. All other ADUs, the maximum amount of floor area we would allow under what we're recommending ranges from 850 square feet to 1,000 square feet. And that is partially based on the state law. State law says we have to allow at least an 850 square foot ADU. And so we have kind of a sliding scale based on the size of the property and the number of bedrooms in the ADU. And this is consistent with state law. Design standards, there are none for state exempt ADUs. For everything else, we're recommending to continue the existing design standards that are in place that basically say you've got to match the house architecturally. So same siding, same roofing, same window types, trim, materials, etc. And the Design Review Commission, I think it was actually in March that we went to them on this, March or April, I forget. They recommended to this commission and to the City Council that we do continue to use those same design standards. Design standards for garage conversions. So you want to convert your garage into an ADU. I want to note, by the way, that under state law, you do not have to replace the parking in that garage. We're prohibited from requiring that. For state exempt ADUs, there's no design standards. All other ADUs, we are recommending that we continue our existing design standards that we put in place in 2017, which basically gives the homeowner 2 options. One is they can maintain an operating garage door that would access maybe a small storage space behind it. I remember Design Review Commissioner Joseph Gorney mentioned that, well, that'd be a great place for a lawnmower, or in his case, a motorcycle. Then you'd have a partition wall and then the rest of the 80 beyond that. So that would be one option. The other is you remove the garage door, you replace it with fenestration matching the rest of the house. So, windows and siding material, etc. And then you put a landscape buffer between the end of the driveway and the wall that used to be a garage door. So we're recommending, and the Design Review Commission recommends that that design standard be maintained, again, for all non-state exempt ADUs with doing a garage conversion. Second story windowsill height. This was something that was the source of quite a bit of discussion. I think it was 4 years ago now, 3 or 4 years ago, based on some direction from the City Council. This was meant to provide some additional privacy for neighbors of ADUs that are second story ADUs. So state exempt ADUs, you sound like a broken record, there is no requirement, there's no design standards. Everything else, we're recommending to keep the requirement that if you have a window, a second story window in an ADU, and if that window is within 10 feet of a side or rear property line, then the window sill has to be at least 5 feet above the floor. So kind of like a bed window sort of thing. So basically it prevents people from staring down into the neighbor's yard. And so we're recommending that that standard be maintained. Limitations for hillside lots. You may know here in Walnut Creek, if you are building on a residential property, single family residential at least, that is more than a 15% slope, you're subject to hillside performance standards, public hearing, special design review, and the like. If you're doing a state exempt ADU, you're not subject to that at all, you're exempt. All other ADUs, we can have standards, but they have to be ministerial. We can't have that discretionary public hearing review. So we have crafted design standards that are ministerial, basically kind of yes/no type standards that can be just administered by staff, that are based on the discretionary standards that apply otherwise to things other than ADUs. And so we're recommending that those be put in place for non-state exempt ADUs on hillside lots. Off-street parking, state exempt ADUs, again, nothing, not required to have parking. All other ADUs, no parking, asterisk. You might ask, well, what's the asterisk, Andy? What are you trying to sneak on us? Okay. The state law for everything other than state exempt ADUs, the state law grants a whole bunch of exceptions to cities, to prevent cities from requiring parking. And the ones that are most impactful to Walnut Creek is if you're building an ADU that's within a half-mile walking distance of any transit stop, we cannot require parking. And when I say any transit stop, I mean a bus stop that is served once a day by a regularly scheduled bus route. And I confirmed that with HCD. It was like, really? Are you sure? And they were absolutely certain on that one. Okay. Well, what does that mean? Let's pull up a map here. This was based on some data. Actually, this map was in part produced by County Connection, very helpful. You'll see the thick blue outline of the city. There's the green areas are our open space areas. And then there's all those dots. Those are all the bus stops that are in and around Walnut Creek. And then the purple, magenta, pink, I've only got the 8-color Crayola box, so I'm probably calling it the wrong color. But those are the half-mile buffers around those bus stops. Now that's the as the crow flies buffer. That's not walking distance. Calculating walking distance is a whole nother thing entirely, but this does give you a pretty good idea of what parts of Walnut Creek are we prohibited from requiring parking. And you'll see basically we've got some parts of northwest Walnut Creek and some kind of out in Ignatia Valley towards Northgate, where if the city wanted to, we could require parking for ADUs. Staff is recommending that we don't require parking. Part of it is keep it simple. This would be a bit of a challenge to administer. Every time an ADU comes in, we've got to do some sort of a calculation. Okay, are you within a half-mile walking distance of this bus stop that's served by a route once a day or not? There's that, but also, if you look at the neighborhoods that aren't under that purple buffer zone, they've got a lot of on-street parking. And, as I mentioned before at the beginning of this presentation, ADUs are a really good option and a good part of the solution towards the housing crisis. And I will say that the city actually gets to take credit for certain ADUs as being affordable housing towards our state housing requirements. And so we really actually there's a reason why we would want to encourage that. There's even a bureaucratic reason why we would want to encourage the construction of ADUs. And so for those reasons, we're recommending that we just don't require parking for ADUs, even in the areas that we potentially could require it. Moving on, three things here. Minimum length of tenancy. You can't have tenants less than 30 days or less than 31 days in an ADU. You can't sell the ADU separate from the house. And delayed enforcement. Let's say you went and built an ADU and you forgot to get a building permit and you get caught. Well, the property owner can request, and we have to grant up to a 5-year delay in any zoning enforcement for that ADU. The only exceptions to that are things like life safety. So if you've got that gas-powered water heater in a bedroom, no, you got to deal with that right now. That's a life safety issue. So those are ADUs. What about JADUs? This will go much quicker, by the way, I promise. Junior accessory dwelling units. What are the regulations there? So these are really as spelled out in state law. We really don't have any say, if you will, in what we can regulate with these. Number of JADUs, you can have one with a single family property. And that has to be either inside of an existing house or inside of a house that's received approvals, like design review or a building permit. So if you're building a new house and you want there to be a JADU in there, you've got to get design review for the whole thing, the whole house. Then you can, after the fact, do essentially like a paper conversion for the JADU. And you can only have one on the property. So one JADU plus one ADU. Setbacks, height, FAR, lot coverage, all the rest of that stuff does not apply, in part because the state law says it doesn't, but more pragmatically, it's because we've already approved the house that you are putting that JADU into, so you don't have to worry about all those things. Floor area, the JADU, as I mentioned before, maximum of 500 square feet. Design standards, really there are none in terms of exterior design, other than the JADU has to have its own exterior entrance door. You can't only have an internal connection. And then getting into some of the finer points of a JADU, you can actually share the bathroom with the main house, and you can share the kitchen requirements is much less. You can have what's called an efficiency kitchen, which under state law literally can be nothing more than like a countertop, a cupboard, and a hot plate. And so then that means your kitchen sink is in the main house, so requiring unobstructed access to any shared bathrooms or kitchen sinks. But again, nothing architectural, nothing regarding the outside of the JADU. Off-street parking, state law says nope, so we're requiring no parking because we cannot require parking. And then the rest of the stuff, very similar to ADUs. You have to, tenants have to be there at least 31 days. So, you know, no Airbnb and the like. Can't sell the, this should say separate sale of JADUs. You can't sell the JADU separate from the house. And then this is a new one here, owner occupancy. If you do a JADU, the owner of the property must live either in the JADU or the primary dwelling. There's no owner occupancy requirement for ADUs, and we're actually prohibited from requiring that now. We used to do that. But for JADUs, state law says we have to require owner occupancy. So, okay, we're going to go ahead and do that. And with that, I apologize for boring you with my long tables with lots of numbers. As you know, I usually like to have presentations with lots of pretty pictures and snappy witticisms, but this is a less funny topic. Anyway, with that, our recommendation is that this commission make a recommendation to the City Council to adopt the draft ordinance that is included as an attachment to the staff report. And I do want to mention, if you've gone through and read all, I forget how many pages of the ordinance, you'll see that there's also an amendment to the tree preservation regulations contained in, I believe it's Title III of our municipal code. Technically speaking, that does not fall under the purview of the Planning Commission, but I do want to mention it since it's in there. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Andrew. Not a bad presentation for your first meeting as our secretary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner questions. Are there any questions from the commissioners at this time? Commissioner Anderson.
Thank you. Just a couple. With the, have you done or do you plan to do any kind of an inventory to figure out how many lots this might apply to in the city?
Number of lots, that's a good question. I do know that there are approximately 34,000 dwelling units in the city, and I think it's 37% of those are single family detached. So if I got my calculator out, I could tell you at least how many lots there are in that case. There's also a single family attached, and that's somewhere around 7,000 units, I want to say. So, oh, I wish Ethan was here. He's really good with numbers like this.
Well, it's a large number, I guess, was the question I would ask.
But yeah, I mean, 40% of 34,000, let's say 20,000 lots that are single family detached or attached. And then, apartment buildings and the like can now also do ADUs.
So assuming that there's a substantial number there, how does that affect our RENA compliance? Or does
It helps. It definitely helps. And actually, I recently made a presentation to the city's Housing and Community Development Committee for the City Council, and I'll be going to the City Council with a similar presentation. I want to say it's on the 15th. I think it's this next week. On our RENA, basically, what is RENA and where do we have capacity to accommodate what's looking to be a very large RENA for this upcoming cycle. ADUs are definitely part of that solution as well. When the I think we're estimating that we might see as many as 35 ADUs a year, and that adds up to like 200 or 350. Oh God, I wish Ethan was here with the numbers again. But it adds up to, it's not like 50% of our RENA, but it helps. As I recall, something like maybe 5% of our RENA could possibly be achieved through ADUs, and it's really a reasonable assumption, I think. And importantly, a lot of ADUs we can, based on how big they are, we can count those towards meeting our affordable housing requirements, not just our overall housing requirement.
And with, I understand from the state requirements, it would permit the city to allow 2 ADUs.
Yes.
But we decided the proposal is just 1.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, the state law does allow us to allow 2 or even more than 2 if we wanted to. And I think the only city I've heard of that's done that is San Francisco. But Walnut Creek certainly could if this commission could recommend to the council, and the council could adopt a regulation that allows more than the 1.
The reason I asked was I was wondering if there'd been any discussion about allowing those on larger lots. 30 years ago, I was involved with a dwelling unit ordinance that which allowed 1 if there was if the lot was twice the zoning for that area. Similar thing. I mean, was there any discussion about whether you could do, say, 2 dwelling ADUs if the lot was 3 times the zoning? So you wouldn't actually be increasing past the regular residential density.
So we haven't really considered that too much. Obviously this isn't universal, but it's not that common to see properties that, especially in our zones that have smaller minimum lot sizes, it's not too common to see properties that are, 2 or 3 times the size, except for, every now and then somebody comes in all of a sudden with 2 acres and they subdivide it. And it's like, where'd that come from? But I mean, they're out there, but it's not too common. We had talked about internally about looking at some of the larger properties in, say, our R20 and R40 zones. R40 is 40,000 square foot minimum lot size, getting upwards of almost an acre there. With a few exceptions, most of those zones are in hillside areas or areas where they're more prone to wildfire hazard. And so it didn't really seem like a great idea to try to add yet more density in those particular areas. But again, that's something that, this commission could recommend and the council could adopt.
And the last question I had was, in the design requirements, there was one that the entrance had to be basically not in the front of the lot, not on the front of the dwelling. I'm not sure if this would be a particular problem with many situations, but could you run into a situation where not allowing, there wasn't any other place to put it? Would that run into the problem of unintentionally, kind of disallowing the ADU?
So that is a requirement. I believe it's for attached ADUs, if I recall correctly. I'm trying to see where that was. Theoretically, sure, it could. I would. let's just say I haven't seen a situation like that come about, and in that particular requirement, we've refined it a little bit. It used to be, and this has actually been a rule on the books here for many, many years, that the door can't be on the front wall, I think is the way the wording is, or where the wording was. You can't have a second door on the front of the house. And so we've clarified that where, it can't be within 45 degrees of parallel to the front wall, et cetera, just because the way the rules were currently or previously written, it left the planners with maybe a little bit too much room to try to interpret and figure out. But I wouldn't anticipate something like that preventing somebody from being able to build an ADU. And honestly, if we did come into a situation where that really truly was the case, the state law actually invalidates on a provision by provision basis any section of the city regulations that conflict with state law. And I think if a clear and convincing case can be made that that front door requirement effectively prohibits an ADU, well, then in that case, it's not consistent with state law, and we would just waive it.
Good. Thank you.
Commissioner Pickett, I believe you had some questions.
I've got a few. Do you have any idea how this compares to with the status of this process in other cities?
You mean like where they are with adopting new regulations?
Right.
It varies a lot. Some cities are, of course, further ahead, but I would say we're kind of in the middle of the pack. I think it was Pleasant Hill or Concord fairly recently. It's probably Pleasant Hill and Concord, probably both fairly recently took theirs. Either Planning Commission or City Council. This state law, I mentioned this in the staff report, but this state law is, if I may be frank, really poorly written. And I don't mean that from a standpoint of the intent. I mean, just you try to read it and, oh man, it's just all over itself, and there's internal inconsistencies and conflicts. And I mean, it took the state, HCD, 9 months to finally come out with a document saying, here's what this all means. And then they revised it, 4 months later, 3 months later. And people are still finding out some of the intricacies. And so it's taken some time. And then, of course, with COVID in the middle of things, that really slowed things down for Walnut Creek and a lot of other jurisdictions. I would say we're kind of average.
Okay. Has this been legally challenged by anybody?
I'm not aware of any court cases at all, much less any published court cases.
Okay. You mentioned that the law stipulates relief on utility hookup fees, which would be East Bay Mud and Contra Costa Water are the two most notorious.
Yes, and Central San.
The sanitary district is learning from them, and they're starting to become notorious. You know any of the details of the restrictions? Are they requiring a zero hookup fee or reducing it substantially?
So if I recall correctly, and I'll have to admit this is a section of the law that I'm not super familiar with because it doesn't apply to Walnut Creek since our utilities are provided by outside districts, special districts. But if I recall correctly, I think an ADU of up to 750 square feet cannot be considered a separate dwelling and cannot be charged separate connection fees. And then anything larger than that, they basically have to prorate it it's either on the size of the ADU compared to the size of the house, or the size of the ADU compared to a 750 square foot ADU. I forget which. I think it's the former rather than the latter. How the districts are actually doing this, I haven't interviewed them, but I've spoken with people that are going through the process of trying to do an ADU, and there may be some confusion at that level as to what fees can be charged. But again, it's something that falls outside of our purview.
Okay. How do building codes relate to this process? If I were to build a new house today, I'd have to put in fire sprinklers. I'm assuming if you built the new ADU, you'd have to put in fire sprinklers.
Yeah. Fire sprinklers are only required if they're required also for the house. If the house has them. So if the house does not have, if I'm remembering correctly, if the house does not have sprinklers, but there is a requirement for it, you cannot then require it for the ADU. I would have to double check that with our building official. It's something that's, it's not something where the city has any discretion in. And unfortunately, our building, I didn't, I neglected to ask the building official to join us tonight. But I know that there are significant waivers to the fire sprinkler requirements for ADUs.
So adopting this thing could enhance our risk of fire threat in the community. Is that correct?
No, I would say that it's really inconsequential because the state law applies regardless of whether or not we have any local regulations. Basically, all those state exempt units, they're exempt no matter what. And then everything beyond a state exempt unit, if we don't adopt our own local regulations, then there's another set of regulations at the state level that allow larger ADUs, frankly, and no design standards. And that waiver for fire sprinklers or whatever other kind of requirements, those are across the board as per state law. We have no say in that.
Okay, but what I'm saying is that if we increase the density of combustible structures in the city substantially, which could happen with this ordinance, and we don't correspondingly increase the fire protection, then we're creating a higher level of jeopardy to our, particularly our single family neighborhoods. We're putting more burnable stuff without requiring fire protection. That would be a concern. I don't know how that's dealt with.
Well, I would say that if we did not adopt our own local regulations, then the default state standards apply, which would potentially result in even more ADUs, or at least larger ADUs, thereby with more combustible material. For better or for worse, the state legislature made the decision for us.
Probably worse. But now there's references to multifamily, and I can't put together in my head how an 80 unit works in a multifamily development, whether it's rental apartments or condominium type of things. How do you do an ADU in a condo that's 900 square feet or 1,100 square feet? How does that work? You have to do it within the airspace of the condo, is that it?
No, so for multifamily, whether it be ownership or rentals, so condos or apartments, you have two options. One is you can have two new construction or conversion. You can have two detached ADUs somewhere on the property, and that couldn't even be in the parking lot, and city cannot require replacement of the lost parking. So that's one option. Or the owner can convert any interior portions of the existing multifamily dwelling. That could include actually the parking garage, for example. The state law, I think, even makes reference to like storage rooms and boiler rooms. As long as you can somehow make it work under building code, you can convert those into ADUs. In Walnut Creek, I think we're perhaps most likely to see this happen. And I say that with a if at all. I don't know if I would expect to see this happen, but what would be most likely is, your classic 1960s, 1970s low rise, 2-3 story apartments that have the tuck under parking with the exterior driveways. Those tuck under parking spaces, that, for example, you could convert into ADUs, and they would, of course, then have direct exterior access on that ground floor. And that would be allowed. That is allowed actually under state law. The city has no say in that.
So if you have a 25 unit apartment building, one owner, 25 rentable units, how many ADUs can you put on that property?
25% of 25, so yeah, I forget if it rounds up or if it doesn't round up, but
6
yeah,
or 7.
yeah,
So they could convert parking into 6 or 7 units.
correct, and that's under the state law.
Okay. Or if they were a larger apartment, they had a rec building or something like that, they could take the recreation building and convert it into a residential.
So if it's a standalone building, they could convert that into you're allowed to have 2 detached ADUs or the internal conversions. The internal conversions have to be actually part of the building with the dwelling units itself. It can't, so if you're converting, an exterior accessory building, then that you've chosen at that point to do up to 2 detached ADUs rather than 25% of your total number of units as interior conversions.
Okay, take the example of the Trinity Avenue area, the downtown, the old apartments you were talking about, the tuck under parking, and the owner of the apartments chooses to take that tuck under parking, make it residential units. They don't have to replace the parking. Where are those people going to park?
Well, they would basically either have to make do with whatever other parking is available in the area, or I think, well, I don't want to say what the intent of the legislature is. I mean, in most of our multifamily areas, fortunately, you're at least more proximate to transit and walkable and bikeable destinations. And in general, that's you start to have a self-selecting tenants. People move there. If there's not a lot of parking, the people who move there recognize that there's not a lot of parking, and they're going to be less likely to have two cars or one car. But that said, I mean, you definitely, you're identifying a valid concern. I mean, I want to first and foremost validate that. But again, this is something where the state legislature has made the decision for us, and we really have no say in the matter.
Okay. Now, I know we have an expert on this topic in our midst, but I'll ask you because it's your turn. How does this relate to homeowners associations and CC&Rs? I know there was something in there that state law basically voids anything in a HOA, CC&Rs that are contradictory to the new state law for allowing ADUs, et cetera. Can you shed any more light on that?
Yeah, so there was two bills that amended the state's civil code, the part that actually regulates HOAs and CC&Rs, and the rules there are almost as strict as for the city, but not quite. Basically, the state law, and I want to preface this by saying that the city really has nothing to do with CC&Rs and HOAs. We do not enforce those. That's completely, the CC&Rs are enforced completely by the HOA. So having said that, my understanding is the state law basically prohibits HOAs from prohibiting ADUs and JADUs, and and prohibits HOAs from implementing unreasonable requirements. I think, or it allows HOAs to implement reasonable requirements, and then it goes on to basically say that HOAs can do whatever they want as long as it doesn't significantly increase the cost of building ADUs or JADUs or effectively prohibit them. So the way I take that is, an HOA could probably get away with requiring the ADU to, match the style of the structure, match the house, that kind of a thing. But the HOA is not able under state law to say, yeah, you can't have that at all.
So some CC&Rs, some developments have restrictions on rentals within their community, whether it be, I know some of them have, okay, only 25% of the units in this development can be rented out, and you need to get approval from the HOA to rent it out. And if they got their 25 and someone comes along and does an ADU and wants to rent it out, is that referred to at all or addressed in the...
Yes, yeah, there was 3 sections of the civil code that were amended, and one of them speaks to exactly that, and it actually invalidates any CC&R restrictions on rentals as it applies to ADUs or JADUs.
Okay, but it does not affect the existing standalone or existing townhouses in the development or condominium.
That I really don't know. I couldn't speak to that quite knowledgeably. I don't believe it does, but I don't know for a fact.
It's probably getting a little off track from the topic. The last thing that's of concern, I realize that, our glorious state government is doing this to us. But it is concerning about the zoning enforcement delay. I know there's a provision about, safety and that kind of public safety issue, that if it's a public safety, like if a guy put in an appliance gas water heater without a permit, that could be a public safety thing. And the building enforcement department, the building department could enforce a red tag or anything like that until that's corrected, until it's inspected and done properly, correct?
Correct.
So earthquake, so any of those things that really are public hazard, but they wouldn't be able to inspect it for earthquake, would they?
Well, basically anything that's related to the building code that's all life safety stuff, and so that the city does not have to, nor would we, issue, a 5-year delay to the enforcement of that, and we retain all abilities to inspect. And in the case, I'm assuming what you're meaning is, would the city be able to require the homeowner to open up the walls so that we can check the framing to make sure the thing's not going to fall down, that sort of a thing?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
basically, you can do that if somebody, regardless of this whole thing, the building department, if something went up without a permit and it was caught, some guy built it and some neighbor reported it, the building department goes out there, and if the unit's 100% complete, they can do an inspection that requires them to prove that it's built according to code and that engineering is done and everything else. Can they do that under this law, or does that mean we have to sit there and live with an unsafe condition in the city until 5 years lapses?
No, we can do that kind of an inspection. We can enforce any of effectively any of the building code, anything that's life safety. What we cannot enforce, or what I should say, what we would have to issue up to a 5-year delay would be like a setback violation, not a fire code separation violation, but let's say they built something in their front yard and it's not a state exempt unit. We couldn't enforce that setback requirement for potentially up to 5 years if the homeowner requested it. But as you mentioned, all the other things you're mentioning, health, safety stuff, absolutely we can.
Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner, Commissioner Strongman.
Yeah, Smith, you said that there was reduced fees from the utilities and the like. Does that include the school district?
Good question. Oh, I was looking this up once. This again falls under the, it's not us collecting the fees sort of thing, but that's a pretty lame excuse for me to not have an answer. So I have looked into it. It was a little while ago. And I know they can collect fees. I forget if there's a reduction or not, but as I recall, there's a separate provision under state law that allows them to continue charging those fees because they're not the exemption under the ADU laws. It talks about capacity charges and things like that, and that really truly applies to utility connections. And if I recall correctly, the school districts can charge school fees, but in some cases, I don't think they can always count the ADU as if it's a whole separate dwelling unit, but they can still count the bedrooms. So usually fees are, as my understanding, and when we have like 5 school districts in Walnut Creek, but I believe they all charge fees based on number of bedrooms.
And they're extensive too.
Yeah.
Personally. Along those lines, you've talked about that these ADUs would help us to have affordable housing in the city. How can we guarantee that they will remain affordable and that the owners just aren't charging $2,000-$3,000 a month for the unit?
Yeah, so the easy answer is we can't guarantee it. This is something that falls under the category of affordable by design. And that's actually why I've been saying that we can count some ADUs as being affordable. It's usually to moderate income households. And that's actually based on the size of the floor area and the number of bedrooms. And so that's based on, looking at what rental rates are for, the various size of units. And the ones that are on the smaller end of the scale, we can report those as being affordable to usually to, like I said, moderate income households to the state for meeting our requirements. But there's nothing to prevent, the homeowner from charging more than that. Generally speaking, though, of course, smaller is cheaper. And also, there's, of course, there are charity, organizations and individuals that intentionally make these things, charge lower rent. But more broadly, I will say, and this is not universal and this is not a guarantee, but usually your typical homeowner who's just renting out the unit in the back, they're not quite as, for lack of a better term, savvy as a large corporate entity that owns hundreds or thousands of apartment units, and they've got, their computer algorithms figuring out to the minute. It's like buying an airline ticket where if you buy it at 3 p.m. on a Thursday, it's going to cost more than if it's at 5 a.m. on a Sunday. Generally, and this is a very, it's a generalization, but usually you're going to find that individual homeowners renting their ADUs, they're not going to be charging the absolute top dollar feasible under in the market because they're just not tracking it that closely. But in answer to your question, there's no guarantee.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Any other commissioner questions? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to questions from the public. I'll open it up now. If there's any member of the public that wishes to provide public comments at this time, please use the raise hand feature or press *9 if you would like to provide a public comment. Mr. Secretary, do you see anybody from the public who would wish to comment on this topic?
I'm on mute there. We have no emails. I was just logging into that. And there is one outside attendee, but they're not raising their hand. And they're still not raising their hand. So I would say no, we have no public speakers here.
Great, thank you. We will then close the public hearing and we'll bring it back to the commissioners for any additional questions they may have, any comments they would wish to make on this topic. Commissioner Ward.
Thank you. First, Mr. Smith, I'd like to thank you for a really clear and informative presentation with regard to this topic. I might be the HOA person that Mr. Pickett was referring to, and we've been dealing with a lot of these ADU requirements with our clients, our HOA clients, and also the short-term rental law that you referred to. And I did laugh when I read your description of these laws as being containing numerous internal conflicts, inconsistencies, and poorly constructed language, because that's pretty much what I've been telling my clients this whole time. It's very, very frustrating. And I thought you did an exemplary job of really going through all of that and trying to sort it out. So when we try and regulate ADUs and JADUs, we're looking at specific things, and you did a really good job, better than some other cities in the area, of coming up with a proposed ordinance that was really clear with regard to minimums, the numbers you can have, the square footage you can have, whether you can have both at the same time, the short-term rental issues, the parking, and the owner occupancy requirements. So I have to thank you for that, because it really helps us out. And I think it helps out applicants and residents and everybody to have everything so clearly stated. And not everyone has succeeded in that, and you did. So thank you. I wanted to alleviate Commissioner Pickett's concerns a little bit with regard to the HOA overlap. There still is a lot of ability of a homeowners association to regulate based on the CC&Rs, and only a small portion of those have been kind of rendered unenforceable by these new statutes that have come through. So you don't have to worry too much about that. Also, just as a practical matter, we're seeing a lot of noise about this, but not a whole lot of applications at all, and mostly because there's just no room for it. Unless you have a large planned development with big yards, you're just not going to be in a position to be constructing anything, because it has to be on your separate interest. You can't commandeer part of the common area to put up your own private ADU. So it's it kind of self-regulates in that way. So that concern is not as acute. And in my mind, JADU, roommate, it's a little, kind of gets to be kind of a blurry line at that point. So we're not seeing a whole lot of people trying to redo their entire home to make it officially a JADU, when they can move somebody in as a roommate and have a hosted rental that doesn't count for short-term rental restrictions in that way as well. So I don't know if that helps at all for you, but I think it may not be as big a concern as you may have thought, just because of the physical limitations of the lots for most multi-unit dwellings and the characterization of the property there. So I didn't really have any questions, because you did such a great job, but I just want to thank you for that. And hopefully we will see some people, because I think Walnut Creek is pretty, we do have a lot of neighborhoods that have large lots and relatively small homes on those lots. So it is a good scenario to put some ADUs there, so that young people going to school can live there, or older family members or other seniors, or just whoever needs a smaller and cheaper housing in a way that really doesn't overpack the neighborhoods with people. I know everybody's always afraid of that and where they're going to park and all this stuff, but it doesn't seem to be happening. So I think we really should encourage it. We have the space. We need more housing. It's a great way to do it in a really inexpensive way. So that's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other commissioner comments? Or would any commissioner like to make a motion this evening?
Okay, I'll make a motion. I don't have that, let's see, the number up in front of me, but I would like to move that we approve the, let's see, I don't have a resolution number on here. The proposed ordinance, zoning ordinance amendment as presented.
I'll second.
I think that will work, Commissioner Ward. Thank you.
I'm sorry,
No, that was
the
perfect.
numbers aren't there, but we're not
There aren't
proposing
any
any
numbers,
changes.
so it's just the amendments to the accessory dwelling unit. You did perfect, and thank
All
you.
right, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Reiser. With that, Commission Secretary, will you call the roll, please?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Let's see, Commissioner Lezak,
Yes.
Commissioner Pickett.
Abstain,
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that. Was that abstain?
abstain, yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Strongman,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Ward,
Yes.
Vice Chair Reiser,
Yes.
and Chair Krasalik.
Yes.
And the motion passes 6-0 with one abstention.
Thank you, Andrew. Nice presentation, nice work. Thank you very much for all your efforts and for filling in tonight for our, as our Commission Secretary.
Yes, thank you.
Our next item of business tonight is Commission considerations. Are there any considerations for the Commission? Commissioner Lezak, would you like to make a comment?
Yeah, I had an item I'd like to bring before the commission just for quick discussion. And that is, we're about to pass through this June 15th period where there is some discussion of City Hall opening to the public and other portions of California opening subject to certain rules. I know we don't know exactly what those rules are. And recently, I believe as of, a couple weeks ago, we all thought after June 15th, we would likely be meeting in person in the council chamber as a commission. And there was recently an email from the city clerk suggesting that may not happen as the city is still trying to determine what the appropriate county health department rules are. And so the reason I bring this up is, and I wanted to put this up for discussion, is that it seemed to me that if the commission if we all were vaccinated, let's say, and decided that we wanted to choose to meet in the council chambers for our next hearings, I know that the public would likely not be there, that would still be remote. But I just wanted to put it out there for discussion to see if, even if the city isn't going to require that, if commissioners would be interested in going back to meeting in person in the council chamber.
Mr. Hickey, could you address that? Because you probably have some words of wisdom for us.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I would say here is I know the clerk's office and city staff are working on this issue as we speak. And there are, as that's worked through, specific issues come up. So for instance, this commission is a 7-member commission as opposed to the city council, who's a 5-member commission. And while you think that might not make a difference, there's, how is that orchestrated in the council chamber? So there are some issues that staff is working through. So I guess I would encourage a little bit of patience here from the standpoint that I think we're working through that with the city council now. And I think the idea is once that process is underway and complete, I think then city staff is looking at, okay, now how do we facilitate that for commission? So I guess my point here is that it's being worked on and it's being considered as we speak. if that assuages any of your concerns, Commissioner Lezak.
No, I mean, that's fine. I mean, I understood the council was considering going back, and given that city staff would be going back in person, it seemed appropriate for certain groups of leaders if they felt it was appropriate to do so also. I wasn't trying to suggest that we must do so. I just was putting it out there as a commission consideration. And so it sounds like something that we should hold tight on, perhaps based on your counsel, and perhaps talk about a revisit at the next meeting, or following that, waiting for some additional report from staff.
Commissioner Strongman.
Along those lines, will in the future, some of us be able to appear virtually, or will we all have to be back in person post-COVID? Probably directing Mr. Hickey on that one.
Yeah, I think that's still to be determined. To be determined.
So I just,
And I also understand that the legislature is looking at a bill that would require that we continue having Zoom meetings as we progress, even when we go back to in-person meetings for the commission members. So we'll see how they decide to roll that out too. Commissioner Ward.
yeah, thank you. So I like meeting by Zoom. I think it also gives a lot more access on the part of the public to participate in these meetings. A lot of people can't make it to City Hall to come in, and they're able to make comments in person or live comments as opposed to only submitting written comments if they're unable to attend. So I really like that. And I hope that at least that hybrid potential is continued. And personally, I actually really like being able to call in as well. So I'm not very anxious to jump back into in-person meetings anytime soon. And of course, I will attend once the council has decided what we're going to do. But I just wanted to throw in my 2 cents that I actually think this format's pretty, it's inclusive and helpful, and I prefer it. Thank you.
And I think Andy hit on it, and Commissioner Ward just hit on it, which is I think there are 2 separate bills pending right now that would, even when the governor's order is rescinded and, cities are no longer allowed to, the current Brown Act rules are no longer suspended. There are 2 separate bills that would still require public participation via teleconferencing, and those are pending now. So it's still a lot to be determined as far as what the law will look like in the next 2, 4, or 6 months.
Commissioner Reiser.
Since we're on the topic of format and venue, I have kind of a crazy question just to throw out there as well. And that is, we're the only commission, the only body that meets at 7 o'clock. And I'm just curious as to the reason behind it. Every other, the city council and all the other commissions start at 6. I'm just wondering where that started out of curiosity, and if that's something we want to get in alignment with as well.
In answer to the why is it like that, I think that falls under the category because we've always done it that way, to be perfectly honest with you. I know, Transportation Commission, which I am secretary, does start at 6, as does City Council. I do want to say there's one other commission that starts at 7. Oh, Design Review Commission, yeah, DRC starts at 7.
Yeah, I will say
That was-
that the Transportation Commission used to meet at 7 a long time ago. And after a lot of whining and the fact that hardly anybody ever showed up, went through a little process to get it to move to 6. And there was a lot of discussion on, do we want to do that? And we want to make sure we don't prohibit the public from being able to easily attend. Commissioner Pickens.
Just give a little historical perspective. This topic has been discussed before, and we have historically stuck with the 7 o'clock. Number one, because commissioners couldn't make it home from work any earlier. They needed time to have dinner. That was a significant thing. Plus the public. And we get greater, we probably get greater public participation than some of the other commissions. So the people in the public have to get home, have dinner, and get down to the meeting also. So every time it's been raised, it's been, no, we need to keep it at this. Doesn't mean it can't change in the future. You know, life's changing, technology's changing our ability to communicate and meet. So, but historically, I don't know, since I've been on the commission, probably 2 or 3 times it's been discussed. And it's always been concluded that 7 o'clock is probably what we have to do. And this doesn't work for both commissioners and public, so.
Commissioner Ward.
So this is where I'm compelled to note that the idea of work being from 9 to 5 is a small type of person that works, on those hours, and that people who care for or are responsible for other people have more difficulty coming to meetings in the evening, because that is either their second job or their only job. So I think that we should revisit the idea of what hours of the day actually are the most available to the most number of people, and acknowledge that while most of us may have the kind of desk jobs that go during the day, and then we come home and have dinner and then do other things, that's not the experience of a lot of people in our community. And so we should be careful not to exclude them based on our narrow view of what work entails and what after work entails. Thank you.
Commissioner Anderson.
I just, I'll throw in my lot with, meeting in person when we can. It does, at least theoretically, the participation by Zoom does allow for more participation. But I don't know, I haven't counted, but I think it's probably single digits the number of public participants we've had since I joined the commission. There really hasn't been a lot of public participation. I don't know whether that's because it's only Zoom and people can't come in person and participate, but I think allowing, getting back in person as soon as we can, so that people who do want to participate in person can do so, but allowing, continuing with the online, the ability to participate online as well, gives everybody the best shot at it. Oh, and if there's too many of us, I'll volunteer to sit 6 feet off the end of the desk.
Any other commissioners have any comments to make this evening? Anything else from you, Mr. Secretary?
Why, yes, as a matter of fact. So I've mentioned at least via email, and I know Ethan Bindernagel, former secretary, had reached out to the commission prior, but Ethan has, unfortunately for us, left the city, and we wish him very well. He's, I think I used the term beloved in an email today when referring to him. Fortunately, he's still a friend, though. So, and actually, I happened to text him earlier today, which was nice. But as you probably also recall, Alan Carrion recently retired. I was actually chatting with him about car stuff last night. And Greg Kapovich a little bit ago left the city as well for an opportunity. And so that's all weighing very heavily on us, obviously, as losing our team members and all that. And of course, then there's, workload issues, but they've got some good news for you. And that is that our esteemed coworker, Haley Crawford, who happens to be sitting a socially distance from me at the moment doing the Zoom operating, has been promoted to the role of senior planner. And she will be supervising our front counter, the planning counter, as well as code enforcement. And so I can say that I and really everybody on our team are very, very happy at this promotion that she's received and has earned.
Well, congratulations, Haley.
Congratulations. That's fantastic.
Thank you. I'm sure I'll be seeing you all soon.
Oh, be careful what you wish for, Haley. But we will be nicer to you than we are to Mr. Smith. Any other comments this evening?
I was just gonna jump back to the meeting time issue, and I heard some varying opinions, and for Brown Act purposes, I would encourage maybe not having further discussion on that specific issue, but at the same time, if there's a consensus of the commission that wants to have a future discussion, a majority of the commission could provide direction to staff to bring back options for considering a change to the meeting time, not necessarily changing the meeting time, but if the commission wants to have that discussion, you can do so. So I just want to make sure that's on the table before we adjourn. Again, not to have the discussion tonight any further, but to agendize an item and to have staff provide options for meeting times and how to amend meeting times if that's something you desire.
Thank you. I think we might want to revisit that discussion once we do get back into the chamber and once we see what the state is going to do with the legislation, because it seems to be changing rapidly and often. Any other comments? Right, seeing none, thank you everybody for your participation this evening. Great job, and we will close the meeting for this evening. Thank you.
Great. Good night, everybody.
Good evening.
Night all.